Welcome, everyone. I've been looking forward to this talk. It gave me a good excuse to, watch TV and pretend I was working. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's nice to do a fun talk instead of a talk about some particular subject that everybody wants to learn more about. Although hopefully you'll all learn something from this talk. We'll see how it goes. Spoiler alert, obligatory. I'm not going to spoil things too badly, I hope, but I will be talking about several episodes and what happened in them and so on and so forth. So just be aware of that if you're going to watch or if you haven't watched the show so far. Beyond that, I thought it would be a fun idea to, like I said, watch The Mandalorian again. Take some notes, see what we can learn, see what lessons we can draw from it, and just have some fun putting together a talk. So that's where this came from. I looked around. There are, talks similar to this on various shows, and Star Wars, especially in the past. Star Wars does not have a great history of security. We've seen all sorts of things from impersonation attacks and people pretending to be who they aren't, bad control of data or governance. There's no encryption anywhere, lots of single points of failure, no physical security to speak of, shared passwords, terminals anywhere giving you access to anything. And of course, they lost 3 Death Stars. So something isn't quite working very well for the Empire. I grew up, I'm just of that age, which is kind of scary now, where I saw A New Hope at the Showcase Theater on First Street in Calgary when I was 5 years old. That's a long time ago. I guess it's called the Grand now, something like that. But so I definitely grew up enjoying Star Wars. So let's have some fun and talk a little bit about security in a Star Wars context. I've broken this down into 6 or 7 lessons. I can't actually remember from The Mandalorian. So we will start with lesson number 1, which is, of course, that while the show is called The Mandalorian, it takes a lot of people doing a lot of things. Mando acts like he's a one-man show, but pretty much throughout the show, he had help. He was working with other people. He was doing his thing with a lot of support, whether that was fixing his ship, extra guns, people peeling him up off the ground and so on. He had a lot of friends, and he wouldn't have survived on his own. I think that's pretty clear. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but cybersecurity is the same sort of idea. There's many different ways we can look at that. Obviously, everyone has a part to play in terms of, our users, our administrators, and so on. But even if we just look at a security team or an IT team, right? Or groups of security people, the security community, everyone has a role to play. Everyone has something to contribute. That's hopefully why you're all at B-Sides. That's hopefully why you're all part of the community. It is a broad space. That's not the word I'm looking for, and no pun intended, but cybersecurity is very broad. Nobody can learn everything. You will need help from your friends and from other people throughout, and you will be asked to give that help, or you should give that help as well, because it's such a broad subject area. Nobody knows it all, of course. Everybody has something they know better than everyone else. Everyone's got something to contribute. Everyone's got their skill set. Whether it's above board legal skill set, if we're talking about the Mandalorian here, or not. Everyone's got something to contribute and something to help. So that was a quick first lesson. I've got a few more here. Kind of building on that theme, let's talk about fun topics like training and mentorship, and of course documentation, because who doesn't love documentation? I don't know if anyone remembers, Baby Yoda, he's small. He can fit inside the bowels of the Razor Crest, inside Mandalorian's ship. At one point, he was tasked with doing some repairs deep down in there. And, just like anyone else, he had a lot to learn. He was gung-ho. He was in there, one wire in each hand, right? we all learn things on the fly. I do every single day pretty much. I mean, at least we have Google these days to help with that. But you have to get that experience somehow, right? You learn by doing, you learn by trying. If you're not willing to do or try, then you're probably in the wrong industry. You got to try stuff, figure it out. That's the only way we're going to get better. As I said, the field is broad. You'll never know everything, but there is a ton of knowledge that you can gain from other people, from Google, your search engine of choice, various forums and communities and Slack and Discord and everything. But most of all, my point is, don't be afraid to try stuff. It's the only way to learn, but you still don't have to go it alone, because this was the best image I could grab of it, but there are risks to going it alone, as Grogu discovered when he did exactly what he wasn't told to do and touched the two wires together. So you want to try to figure things out, but also you need to know when to ask for help. And actually, if you listen to Paul's Security Weekly, or if you've ever listened to it, you'll hear Paul many times talk about his philosophy, which is he does this and he wants people to go out and try and solve problems for themselves. Don't come and ask me if you haven't put in the work to try and figure it out for yourself. But at the same time, you can't just bang your head against the wall forever. So try something, try to figure out, try to find a solution, and then go and ask for help, right? And when you come and ask me for help, tell me what you tried. Because and when I tell you to try other things, don't go back and continue to try the things I've had that experience before too. But tell me what you tried, what your thought process was, and maybe I'll give you something else to try. Maybe I'll help you over a hump, or get you going down a path, or help solve the problem. So try to figure it out. Don't be afraid to ask for help at some point. And I hate to say it, but I've seen tons of environments. I've worked in many. I've caused this problem myself. We're constantly dealing with environments where nobody knows how they work. So anything you can do to make that a little bit easier on the people that come after you. Documentation doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be formal. My wife teaches literacy, right? It's about communicating ideas, not being perfect, because that will help others from getting their wires crossed. So as Mando says, every day is a school day, right? You don't want to rely on other people to do your thinking for you. As I said, try and figure it out, but not for too long, because after a point, you are wasting time and effort. I want you to learn. I don't want to waste your time. So try first, ask for help, tell me what you tried, and share what you know. Most of my talks, at some point, I seem to end up talking about imposter syndrome. It's real, but it shouldn't be, right? Everybody has unique expertise that we can all learn from in this broad space. And of course, most importantly, be a force multiplier. See what I did there? What I mean by that is, and this is something I repeat often as well. For me, I mean, I'm in a customer facing role, so my customers are a priority. But putting that aside, or after that, my number one priority is the things that I can do that will unstick somebody else, that will unblock someone else. If I can do anything for my team or for my customers that will help them progress in what they're doing, that is my priority. That's what I mean by being a force multiplier, right? If I can get somebody else on a path to being productive, now two of us are being productive. So that to me is one of the most important things in our industry. So moving on from people, although I'll come back to it at the end. Lesson number 3 from The Mandalorian is preparation and response, right? There was a plan A and a plan B and probably a plan C in a lot of different episodes. The example that I will give of preparation is the Mandalorian himself. He has many tools at his disposal, whether you talk about his armor to start with, various different weapons from the flamethrower to the long gun to the pistol to the, his hand-to-hand skills, his rocket, his staff, or, his rocket jetpack, and so on. He had many different ways of approaching any sort of problem, of getting himself out of a jam. If one thing didn't work, hopefully another would, right? The middle of an incident or an attack or a mission, if you will, is a bad time to figure things out. He was generally prepared for anything and had a lot of contingencies or a lot of different ways that he could get himself out of a jam, achieve his goal, so on and so forth. Because things will go wrong, and when they do go wrong, you need to have an alternative, whatever that alternative is. We're talking about, just day to day in an operational role, in an incident response role. You need to understand your tools, understand their capabilities, figure out what you need to do or what you're capable of doing and different ways of doing it. I mean, I could talk for days on preparation in an incident response context. It is the probably most critical phase. Everything from thresholds, when am I going to, knowing in advance that at this point I'm going to make this decision or take this action rather than arguing about it in the moment. Stuff like contracts and having the right tools and the right permission and the right people engaged, the right information, decisions pre-made. We could go on and on and on. You want to know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and how you're going to do it if that fails before you have to figure out what you're doing in the heat of the moment. And I kind of use the various weapons and skills, I guess, that the Mandalorian has as an analogy for that. On the opposite side of the fence, we have the single playbook brute force approach. Bring in more stormtroopers and continue to miss, right? That seems to be the Empire's response or solution to preparation, right? Just throw more stormtroopers at the problem. We all know they don't practice their shooting enough. That would be a start from a preparation perspective. And quite often, as we saw in The Mandalorian, that lack of preparation led to mass stormtrooper casualty. Clearly, and in an incident response context, they didn't really do their lessons learned very well, as is evidenced by the 3 Death Stars that they are now without. So Mando has spoken. Come prepared for anything. Defense and offense. Obviously, his role is more in an offensive capacity, but the concept of defense in depth or offense in depth. What I mean by that is you often build a security practice around a dominant security control. Every organization has one product, one capability, one thing that they tend to build their security program or capabilities around. Or maybe it's 2 or 3, but it's a small number. So in the Mandalorian's case, that's his armor. He walked through a lot of things that would kill him, basically, with that armor. That's his, I don't want to say his crutch, but his foundation. And then he built all of his other capabilities, in his case, offensive, around that Beskar, around his armor. And of course, he had multiple ways to accomplish each task. So, I've seen lots of organizations that go best of breed, that have every tool under the sun, and then they don't use them. I'm very much of the philosophy, you want to build your security around 1 or 2 core capabilities, and then fill in the gaps with other capabilities, just like Mandalorian did. So moving on to a few more lessons. These ones are a little bit bigger. I'll go into a little bit more depth. And the first one is key management, or should I say key management. This is a trope, I think, throughout all of the Star Wars movies, is these Empire code cylinders. To me, they're just passwords, and they're not very good passwords, right? It's Empire 123 exclamation mark. I'm sure that's a pretty common password. These cylinders, and it happened many times in The Mandalorian. It seems like, does anyone remember back when somebody discovered you could open those kryptonite bike locks with a Bic pen? That's what these things remind me of, right? Everyone's got just a cylinder, and they're not Doctor Who pens either. These are just cylinders. Stick them in, turn them, doors open. They work. The same one works to open doors. They control computers. They decode communications. They do everything, and there doesn't seem to be any real difference between them. We saw that many times throughout The Mandalorian. In a world where there's hyperspace and hyperspace travel, they don't have biometrics. And basically what they're doing is they're using Torx screws to secure the empire, right? Just, yeah, we've got a tool, or it's like, the Apple laptop screws too. But we've got a special input-output port, if you will. And as long as you have the right dongle to connect to that, then you're going to be successful. There's not a lot of variability or fit for purpose security here. These code cylinders, they seem to work on just about everything. Passwords are not a strong suit. It amounts to a shared password, number one. That's what the code cylinders seem to be. There's no concept of least privilege, because these things, as we saw, and I'll talk about again, the same cylinder will open every single door. It will do everything. There's no separation of duties as a result. Everybody can do everything. And yeah, this is something we're all familiar with. It's the same idea of those shared accounts, those shared passwords, those terrible passwords. And in some cases, and I'll come back to this, that lack of segmentation or segmentation between different, I don't just mean at a network level, but data classification and so on as well. Something else the Empire was subject to many times throughout not just The Mandalorian, but in Star Wars, the movies as well, were replay attacks. A very pervasive problem. How many times do you recall someone, a situation where a password or passphrase or code was stolen somewhere along the way, and it works days, months, years later? And that's the only kind of security. Basically, I heard this password used in the past, I'm going to use it again. We've got replay attacks, right? Mayfield, we're going to talk about him some more. A former prisoner of the Empire still had valid access codes to an internal Imperial terminal, okay? You send the guy to jail, he knows your passwords. Maybe that's a clue that you should start changing them. So definitely a challenge for the Empire. So Mando's recommendations. The Empire needs more multi-factor. Sound familiar? It's probably one of those easiest or best bang for the buck capabilities. I saw a statistic that Azure or Microsoft as a whole is still only at about 10% adoption for MFA. I think, and that seems really, really low to me, but that's the number that's been published. The Empire needs more multi-factor. We want to eliminate shared passwords. We want to change passwords that have been breached. And I put an asterisk there because I am not a fan of willy-nilly password changing. You choose a bad password today, you'll choose a bad password tomorrow. Making you change it doesn't make it any better. But, so I'm not a fan of the 90-day password change policy, and I could go on for a long time about that if given the opportunity. So, I will tell the quick story that 90-day password change policy, to my understanding anyways, maybe this is urban legend, but it goes back to a 1984 NIST, I think they called them green books, manual, that was based on the fact that if you had a 9600 baud modem, yes, I remember those too, it would literally take you 180 days to transmit every possible 8-character password, uppercase, lowercase, with special characters. Therefore, they said, well, if it takes 180 days to brute force or transmit every possible password, if we force you to change them after 90 days, you're probably in pretty good shape, right? Well, somewhere an auditor, and sorry if there's any auditors here, read that standard, and it stuck, and we've been living with it ever since. I know it's changed, and NIST has finally updated their guidance recently, but I am not a fan of those password change policies at all. I mean, my pet peeves or guidance, change passwords when they're breached, absolutely, or when you think they've been compromised. But otherwise, just make them long. That's all we really need to do, and have intelligent lockout. account lockout on everything that and build that capability in. Again, if someone fails their login 10 times in a row, I don't care. They're going to have to phone in for help at some point. I'm not going to just automatically unlock your account. I give you 10 tries in a row. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to fail those 10 tries. It's not 10 tries in 30 minutes, then I'll reset you to 0. No, if you fail 10 times in a row without getting it right, then you need to call in for a new password. Now, we need to deal with the flip side of this, which is brute force attacks from the outside and so on and so forth. That's where multi-factor and other things come in. But I'm just talking internally. If you fail that many times, you don't know your password, just call me and I'll unlock your account. So sorry, little bit of a tangent there, but that's kind of the point of this. Principle of least privilege, we all know it's fundamental principle. Definitely a problem. Every episode of The Mandalorian, once you get in the door, which didn't have any locks on it either, you could walk around the whole place and use the same key to enter the cockpit, as the lab, as the prison cell, as the whatever, right? And separation of duties goes right along with that. Why is somebody carrying, why does one person have that level of access? Why is it not spread amongst multiple people? And another terrible dad joke, I guess, I'm also of that age. Key rotation, it does not mean what you, being the Empire, think it means. Key rotation means something very, very different. Let's do that occasionally. Speaking of physical security, as we know, the Empire did not have great physical security. For example, there were 2 different episodes, The Prisoner and the Heiress? Wow, Heiress, where involving essentially secure transport. Prisoner was a prison ship. The Heiress was a ship transporting weapons. And in both cases, Mando and company were able to, slightly different scenarios, but essentially dock or open a door, land on the ship, and go straight in. No, it's literally, again, I guess it's that same kind of door, right? You turn the turn the key and any key works, right? But in both cases as well, the computers were completely unprotected. In some cases, or in one case, was the prisoner, I guess, from outside. Yeah, we'll just connect into the computer and take control of everything from outside. In the prisoner, the droids would only fight if engaged. You could walk right past them, but if engaged, then alarms would go off. Then you'd get into a fight. And then they would try to defend the ship, basically. There was absolutely no segmentation. Again, whether it was the prison ship or the transport, you've got weapons in the hold, but there's nothing preventing you from getting there. Or in the case of the Heiress with the transport ship, they actually trapped the Empire folks in the cargo hold and then opened the doors from the other side. They managed to, in the end, after giving Mando and company free reign on the ship, they were going through up and down levels, through corridors. Then they finally said, oh, maybe we should close these doors, which apparently they didn't have central control of, and they trapped them in the control room, where they could then open the outside doors and flush everybody out, and so on. They had no ability to compartmentalize, to segment, to lock down and trap the intruders or restrict their mobility. The critical doors could be opened from the wrong side. In the prisoner, the Mando ended up in a prison cell, which had a lock or a door opening mechanism on the inside. He literally grabbed the arm with the key off of a robot and used it to open the door from the inside. Like, I don't think these people understand what a prison cell and what physical security means. And that was a great example of something else that we see a lot these days, which is living off the land. Mando was trapped in a prison cell. A robot helpfully stuck its hand in the door. I keep saying robots. Why am I not saying droids? Anyways, a droid stuck its hand in the door. Mando ripped off its arm and was able to use that to unlock the door. But that's living off the land, which is what our attackers are doing. or attackers are doing in our environments these days, right? They're not using exploits. They're not running fancy custom tools, although those obviously exist. They are coming in and still running local utilities, whether that's PowerShell, whether that's built-in other management utilities, whatever they are. That's exactly what happens, and that's pretty much what Mando does throughout the Mandalorian. Oh, and I should mention too, in both of these ships, I think they were able to literally walk into the cockpit, which is the control room, which apparently, even though they knew there were intruders on the ship, the Empire wasn't able to secure, so they would not do well against any sort of hijackers as well. So, Mando has spoken in this case. Some lessons learned in his report. Obviously, physical security breaches enable electronic breaches. We understand that. But what I wanted to do is relate some of these physical security concepts back to cybersecurity. And it all starts with strong architecture. Do the basics well. I'll talk about this a bit on the next couple of slides, but if you do the basics well, if you have a good foundational architecture, the rest becomes so much more simple, easy, scalable. Separate from that, we do obviously want to secure administrative or management access. You don't want intruders running around your ship, controlling all the doors, opening all the cells, stealing all the stuff, whatever. Segmentation and compartmentalization enhance security in two contexts. One, creating more barriers for attackers to get through to get to what they're after, but also so that you can, when faced with them, you can add more, faced with them being attackers, you can add more compartments, add more segmentation, add access lists, close some doors, restrict their movements so that you can control and get them out of your environment. And of course, monitoring and detection and alarms matter because there were none in any of the scenarios I've been talking about. But they only matter, of course, if you have capable response, going back to the just flush a whole bunch of stormtroopers out the door and see if they can hit the target and not end up sprawled on the ground, which was pretty much the theme of The Mandalorian. And I guess talking about segmentation and network segmentation, I've said it a few times. Honestly, if you think about it, least privilege is a form of segmentation as well. Dare I say zero trust? Same idea. I don't want to go down that road, but we want to segment and break up our networks as well as our access control. Speaking of architecture, I stole this from Sans, but I just wanted to really quickly bring this up. We have lots of things we can do from a security perspective. It starts with architecture. Then we have passive defense, which is basically built-in inherent defense. Then we have active defense, which involves the people who are monitoring and responding. And we can augment that even further with intelligence. And if we want, go on the offense, and not necessarily offense in a hacking back context, but actively trying to block the attacker, trying to, get them out of the environment or shore things up against them as we go. Looked at a different way, and this is why I wanted to go down this path, this is your return on investment. Architecture has the greatest value because it's foundational, it's fundamental for the least cost. That's why the previous slide, this one goes left to right, is because architecture is biggest bang for the buck, and everything in security is about bang for the buck. Then we have the passive and active and intelligence and offense, and a lot of organizations don't get to the top of the pyramid, the value pyramid, and that's fine. We absolutely want to start with architecture because that makes everything else much simpler, and that's something that the Empire failed to do. Lesson number 6, the Empire does ICS. And of course, it wouldn't be the Empire if they did it well. So the Empire does ICS badly. There was The Siege, a different episode where there was an Imperial base that got its power from thermal energy. There were lava rivers apparently that flowed by every day. And shocker, there was a code cylinder that granted, a single one, that granted access to the lab, to the research contained in the lab, to the data, to the control room, and to the heat shaft and the process itself. We all know in an ICS environment, we need to segment our corporate and our control networks. In this case, they had the lab the single key, meaning no segmentation, worked for the lab, the test network, the research network, the business network, aka just the base itself, and of course the ICS in the heat shaft. In the lab itself, there was no authentication, no encryption. All the data was there for the taking. There was no monitoring of the process, though. We had this little fancy gauge that went from green to red, but that didn't do anything. Nobody came to stop it. Nobody tried to resolve the issue. No systems kicked in to try and fix it. There was basically no process monitoring and no safety instrumented system, which, for those of you familiar with ICS, its sole job is to keep things safe as that objective third party looking in and saying, hey, you just closed the cooling ducts. I think that's what they did. I can't remember. Now it's getting hot. Maybe I should stop the process, shut things down. Nothing like that. So again, bad job of ICS security there. This was, again, the same things applied. There's no segmentation. There were shared passwords. There was no monitoring. And talking about the SIS, right? We want to have our process be inherently safe. That means it stays safe on its own. Nuclear reactors in theory do this, right? They generate steam. That steam turns a turbine. Then it condenses, turns back into water, which ensures that the nuclear rods stay covered in water. That's self-contained. No human needs to interfere with that. That's the way it works. That's an inherently safe process. That's where we want to start. Then we have controllers that try to programmatically manipulate things to keep it safe. Then we have operators who can take their steps to fix problems when those measures fail. Then we have the safety system, which can take that outside view and shut things off. And then we even have passive controls like safety valves or things like that can blow out, and even external protections like downstream dams and additional dams downstream and so on. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that you need to securing your ICS is about securing this process. The process is what rules, and I don't really care how you do that. Real world protections are just as good as electronic protections, but if you don't notice when your process is about to go boom, then you have a problem. One other ICS story, more or less, was the Believer, where there was a Rhydonium mining and refining plant. Long story short, they needed to get in because this was apparently a good place to get access to an Empire terminal to find out where the bad guy was, where his ship was. And so apparently this plant refinery was the place to do that. And it happened to be and of course, speaking to no segmentation again, or compartmentalization of networks and data, why you would go to a remote mining world to get access to the central database, again. But Rhydonium blows up. In this episode, they first hijacked a truck by stopping it in a tunnel, chatting for a while, getting in the truck and driving it on. So why did nobody notice that? But that was essentially, analogous to a phishing attack, right? A remote endpoint compromise. They stopped the truck, got social engineered, basically, more so than phishing. But anyways, and that remote endpoint was compromised. And they were able to drive the truck, kind of analogous to poor endpoint security. So it got not only was it stopped, but they were able to get in the truck, drive it, escalate privileges, and use it to enter the plant by impersonating a trusted user. We never see that happen, do we? Put on a helmet and nobody knows who you are. This one, though, was a bit bizarre in that they literally, at least the way I understand the episode, the Empire had a list of genetic signatures of people who were not allowed into the plant. A negative enforcement model. Well, come on. Can the Empire really maintain a list of all of their enemies, all of the bad people from their perspective in the world? What possibly makes them think that is a good idea? That's a negative enforcement model. We want a positive one, right? We want a permit list. These are the people who are allowed. There was a terminal. When they got to the terminal, it required a face scan. Mando was there because he was not on that list of genetic signatures. Nobody had seen his face. And apparently, any face could be scanned. That I don't know, whatever. Any face was good enough to be authorized. They had unauthorized access to data to learn the location of the ship. Their escape was data exfiltration. And of course, they blew things up on their way out the door, which is kind of more or less ransomware. So we saw in this one episode a full attack chain. I guess there was no command and control really. But other than that, this was a full kill chain or full attack chain of an attack. And I just want to enforce, and I'll mention it on the next reinforce. I'll mention it on the next slide, that negative enforcement model. What I'm saying is they had a list of known bad people, kind of like antivirus does, traditional antivirus, that weren't allowed in Empire facilities. So anybody else was permitted in. That's a default permit, right? They need to move to the default deny, a positive enforcement model, which says this is what I will permit. And you know, I usually think of those things in terms of firewalls. It's really bizarre to have that in an authentication system, basically. Yeah, anyone who I don't say anyone who I don't say cannot come in is allowed in. That's my authentication. So you can be anybody as long as you don't authenticate yourself as a bad person. That was just bizarre. So Mando's after action report. The Empire didn't detect the truck stopping and being delayed. There was an anomaly. Mayfield, his ex-criminal partner in crime on this one, was the only trooper, anyways, in the episode not wearing a helmet for the whole time. And of course, because he wasn't wearing a helmet, he got recognized. But why? Anyways, he's standing out as an anomaly by not wearing a helmet. The deny list was incomplete. Not only was it a deny list, but it wasn't complete. They didn't keep track of all the bad because they didn't detect Mayfield there. A terminal on Morak, that was the name of the planet, can access sensitive information in the core of the Empire network. Again, segmentation, data governance, access control. Their MFA, there was no MFA, and the biometrics were not functional, since any face would do. And of course, I talked about the positive enforcement model at length. So yeah, that's they did not do, and these are critical. You know, this was a facility where things were blowing up all the time. This was not great security for ICS. So finally, a little bit of miscellanea, a little bit of a grab bag. We saw tracking beacons throughout the Mandalorian. Privacy was not a thing. Mando could see and hear through walls and long distances and so on and so forth. I was going to do a full slide about this, but I decided not to. In the Sanctuary, I think it was called, they built a defensible architecture and trained a bunch of noobs to successfully stop an ATST. In many cases as well throughout the show, they bypassed defenses, aka blew doors off hinges, rather than trying to defeat them. So you just have to be aware that attackers aren't always going to come at you the way you think they are. Every time I do a pen test, I think I know how it's going to go, and at least half the time I'm wrong. It goes a completely different way. Stormtroopers, I just thought it was kind of interesting. You know, it'd be pretty easy to create an IOC for stormtroopers because they're all the same. That's just one IOC I got to manage. And another point too is tools like, say, Metasploit or like IG-11, the whatchamacallit droid, the bounty droid. They're neither good nor bad. IG-11 got reprogrammed and used for very noble purposes, protecting Grogu. They're just tools. And the same thing is true, whether it's PowerShell, that's a tool. That's a blue team tool. It's a red team tool, or Metasploit or whatever else. They are just tools. So a couple of concluding slides, you know, just some takeaways, I guess. The basic controls, they still matter a lot. The defensible architecture, that's your foundation. I started there. Your network segmentation, authentication, authorization, MFA, least privilege, separation of duties, management of privileged access. Obviously, these are core security concepts. They still matter every single day. Of course, they're going to get defeated, as we saw. Monitoring, logging, alerting, those things all matter too, so that you have an opportunity to respond. It's not just about detection. You know, it's about your defenses, like Mando's armor, are there to force the attackers in down a different path where they are weaker, where they might be revealed, where you might detect them or have an opportunity to fight back against them, but you have to be able to fight back. You have to be able to respond. Data governance was not the Empire's strong suit, from you know, Death Star plans to passwords. Neither was backup, fault tolerance, or redundancy. there was a single point of failure in every one of those Death Stars, and encryption apparently really wasn't a thing. So basic controls still matter, but to finish where I started, so do people, and maybe more so. As I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be the bottleneck. You want to be that force multiplier, but you also want to ask for help and offer help as appropriate. As I've tried to make clear, everybody has something to offer. So join those communities, participate, share your knowledge, because I guarantee you there's somebody out there who's interested in what you have to say, even when it's trying to relate television to cybersecurity and torture some analogies and all of those things. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining me. This was a little, I had more fun putting this together. Hopefully you guys had some fun, and ladies and everybody had fun